The story of Jesus' daughter Sara was not lost. It was hidden. For centuries, the Vatican has kept this forbidden bloodline in silence, locking her memory behind sealed vaults and vanishing scrolls. Her name was not erased because it was a myth, but because it challenged everything the Church claimed to protect. Why did they hide her? Tonight, we follow the trail of a secret too sacred to speak. Before we uncover the evidence hidden for 2,000 years, I invite you to join our community of seekers. If you are facing any struggle in your life, write your prayer request in the comments now. We are a family that believes in the power of prayer for each other, and if you are ready to hear the story they tried to erase, comment with the words, "Her name was Sara." Now, like this video, subscribe, and take a deep breath, because the silence is about to be broken. In a quiet room deep beneath the Apostolic Palace, a dying custodian whispers the name Sara for the first time in 60 years. He was once just a man trusted to carry fragile parchment. In the quiet, after the priests had gone, he read what he was never meant to see, a scroll sealed with 3 rings of wax, bearing the symbol of a broken fish. Inside, a few faded lines. Sara, daughter of the teacher, born beneath the fig tree, hidden but not forgotten. He knew at once what he had found. Days later, the scroll vanished. The room where it was stored was bricked up. Now, on his deathbed, he reveals its secret. The story, he says, does not begin in Rome. It begins in the hills of Galilee, where Mary Magdalene carried not only grief, but a child. What the Vatican feared was not that the story was false. They feared it was true, because if Jesus had a daughter, the Church's most guarded secrets were not written in stone, but in blood. In those fragile years after the crucifixion, the apostles argued over which truths would form the foundation of a new world. But not all truths were welcome. The existence of Sara complicated everything. Peter, under pressure from Rome and the growing need for structure, believed unity required simplicity. The idea of a divine bloodline terrified them. It meant faith could become inheritance, leadership passed down through a Childer girl who had never preached a word. So, a pact was made. Quiet, unofficial, unspoken, in public. They would call it protection. And slowly, the name of Sara was erased from their gatherings, their teachings, and finally, from the writings that would become scripture. Thomas, ever the questioner, continued to record what he had seen. His writings, later branded as heresy, spoke of a flower from the tree of Magdalene. Another man, a traveler also named Matthew, wrote of a hidden daughter whose name meant princess. Today, that manuscript is said to rest in the Vatican's secret archives, with one final sentence scratched in the corner: "If her name is spoken, the truth will rise again." Those words haunted Peter. He had always carried doubt, though he never let it show. Even after the resurrection, even after the miracles, there were moments when silence felt louder than faith. Now, with the early church beginning to grow, the message had to be clear, solid, unshakable. He saw Sara not with hatred, but with fear. If the church belonged to blood rather than faith, what would become of those who had given their lives to the path? He confronted Mary Magdalene in the courtyard of a stone house near Capernaum. The air smelled of bread and oil. He asked her why she had not taken the child and vanished into the hills. Her reply was like still water: "Because truth does not run." He had no reply. They walked for a while after that, saying little. Sara had been asleep, wrapped in linen, her tiny fingers curled like shells. Peter had glanced at her, then looked away. The next day, Mary was gone. Her name fell from sermons. Her presence was erased. But the truth she carried could not be undone. Sara was still small when the whispers became louder than prayers. It was no longer safe in Galilee. Mary moved at night, holding Sara close, her destination a vision: Egypt, a land where silence held more power than swords. Along the way, she met an old scribe who had been a secret follower of Jesus. He saw Sara and bowed his head. That night, he told Mary of a dream he once had, a flame in the shape of a flower. He believed Sara was that flame. Before they parted, Mary carved a small symbol into a stone, a spiral wrapped around a single eye, the sign of the Watcher. In Egypt, Mary found refuge in a village where no one asked her name, but the past was never far. One evening, a traveler arrived from Jerusalem. He stayed for only a day, but when he left, the air felt different. Mary understood the unspoken message. Time was running short. With her walked Martha, her sister in faith, and Lazarus, the one Jesus had called back from death. They walked together toward the sea, not for escape, but for exile. The boat they boarded was strange. No sails, no oars, just a long, low vessel of dark wood waiting in the mouth of the Nile. It moved as if guided by something deeper than the sea. On the seventh morning, they saw land, a wild, wind-swept shore in Gaul, a place that would one day be called Les Saintes-Maries-de-la-Mer. The truth had arrived in a boat without sails, and once again, it was choosing silence. The people of this land were used to things that did not have names. Mary and Sara settled into the rhythm of the village. Sara grew quickly, a curious child who seemed to belong to the sea itself. The elders said she knew things she had never been taught. When Romani wanderers arrived, they recognized Sara instantly. An elder woman knelt before her and wept, giving her the name Kari, dark and sacred. She was no longer just a child. She was a symbol, a mystery wrapped in human skin. But this veneration drew unwanted attention. A local priest warned of heresy. Mary felt the old fear return. Danger always knows where to find what it fears most. During a yearly festival, where fire met salt, an elder motioned for Sara to speak. She stepped forward and spoke in a tongue no one could place, yet everyone understood. She spoke of a man who loved truth more than power, and of a mother who hid to protect. She ended with a single sentence: "The flame will return when the salt no longer fears the sea." The next morning, the priest was gone, having fled back to the mainland. The mystery was no longer quiet, and across the sea, in quiet chambers of stone, men began to turn their heads. A Roman soldier named Quintus Varro was sent to investigate. What he found was not an army, but a girl. She looked at him with an unnerving recognition. In his private journal, he wrote, "She looked at me like she already knew my death." Soon after, another officer arrived, questioning the priest. The Vatican did not yet wear its crown of marble, but its hand was already reaching. Quintus was ordered to watch, but when Sara briefly vanished and reappeared unharmed in a circle of strange symbols, he disobeyed. His final journal entry read, "She is not lost, she is waiting. And God help the one who tries to silence her again." Nearly 100 years later, strange letters surfaced in Alexandria, telling of a community in the West who honored a holy daughter, Sara. The letters described a ritual beneath a fig tree and hymns sung at night. A scholar named Ephraim found them, but when a bishop inquired, his home was burned and the letters vanished. Only copies survived, passed hand to hand. One fragment carried a sentence that would cause deep unease in the Vatican. "She walks through time not as shadow, but as key. And when the key turns, the silence shall fall." That key appeared in the Gospel of Mary. Not included in the Bible, it was hidden in the sands of Egypt. In it, Mary Magdalene speaks as a teacher and leader. But between the lines, there is a repeated mention of the child of light, never named, but always present. A Vatican translator in the 1930 seconds noted gaps in the manuscript, like words carefully removed. He wrote, "There is a sense of a second presence, not just Mary and Christ, but a third." He was soon transferred to a remote monastery. His final note, found after his death, read, "She was erased, not because she was false, but because she was too real. Long before she was a whisper in hidden gospels, Sara was blessed beneath a silent fig tree on her 7th birthday. Mary anointed her with water from a sacred spring, whispering words in a forgotten tongue. As she did, the sky shifted. The tree dropped 3 ripe figs out of season. It was a baptism with no witness from Rome, but the story was passed down and eventually recorded in a monk's journal, now stored, unread, in the Vatican Apostolic Library. The child they tried to erase had already been claimed by something older than the Church. Centuries later, a Dominican archivist named Brother Matteo found a commentary on the Book of Revelation. It described a woman clothed with the sun who gave birth to a child. A marginal note in Latin read, The child is not Christ, the child is hers. Matteo realized it meant Mary Magdalene and Sara. He began finding hidden images in religious art. A woman in red and gold holding not the infant Jesus, but a young girl, always with watchful, timeless eyes. His secret letter about it never reached its destination, and he vanished. All that remains is a copy and a loose page bearing one phrase: she was clothed in silence so she could not be seen. But still, she shines. To enforce that silence, Peter issued a secret edict to early Christian leaders. The name of the child shall not be spoken. Let no one write it. Let no one teach it. Fragments of this edict have been found etched into chapel walls and translated in Coptic texts. In sealing her name, Peter made her unforgettable. Because what we bury in fear has a way of growing roots. The silence trembled hardest in Alexandria. In the 4th century, a scribe named Atticus found a scroll that spoke of a girl baptized in the West, carrying a bloodline that could open the gates between the worlds. It named her Sara, the living question. Days later, a man in black robes arrived, and the scroll was taken. Atticus was never seen again. His hidden copy survived, only to be rediscovered in the 1960 seconds. A scholar sent it to the Vatican for translation assistance. No reply ever came. In the French countryside, a chapel carved into stone holds a map etched on its walls. 7 concentric rings, each with a symbol aflame. A chalice, a starand at the center, a closed eye. Above it, the words, "Veils guard the daughter." An 18th century Jesuit mapped the symbols and found they formed a pilgrimage path from Galilee to Gaul. His findings were confiscated. The secret of the 7 veils was not metaphor. It was a trail leading directly to Sara. In the 1600s, a Jesuit named Brother Luca compiled his findings into a book, The Testament of the Flame. He wrote with calm certainty, "You may silence a name, but you cannot quiet blood." Men arrived with sealed orders. Brother Luca vanished, his book confiscated. To this day, the Vatican denies it ever existed, but some believe it was never destroyed, only hidden, like the girl herself. Renaissance painters joined the quiet rebellion. A Flemish master, Peter van Amstel, began hiding a girl in blue in the backgrounds of his sacred fresco standing behind a tree at the tomb, a shadow behind a pillar at the Last Supper. Other artists followed suit. The blue child appeared in altarpieces and tapestries across Europe. A French historian catalogued these appearances in a book, The Blue Child. It was banned by the church a year after publication. A note tucked inside one of the 5 surviving copies reads, "She was remembered in color when her name was no longer allowed." The villagers of southern France didn't need color, they had faith. They chose their own saint, Saint Sara la Kali. Her shrine stands in Les Saintes-Maries-de-la-Mer. Her statue rests in shadows, her skin darker than most saints, her expression always watching. Each May, thousands walk barefoot into the sea with her image held high. They come not because the Vatican told them to, but because their grandmothers did. The story was never written for them, it was lived. In the marshlands of the Camargue, whispers of a living bloodline persist, centered on a family known as the Darcels, whose women are known for their silver-gray eyes. For generations, they have kept to themselves, but each May, they stand in the sea, the youngest daughter holding a candle for someone they call the survivor. Not all saints wear crowns, and not all royal lines need thrones. In a dusty church archive in Burgundy, a 17th century baptismal record was found with a smudge name, but clear initials, S.D. Beneath them, a Latin phrase, sub rosa, sub lumen, under the rose, under the light. The priest who found it was told the ledger was transferred to the Vatican for preservation. He never saw it again. The healer of Languedoc, a woman named Isabeau, drew symbols in ash and whispered ancient prayers. She never entered a church. When a priest asked about her power, she simply asked him, "Do you know her name?" The one they forgot, the one they hid. Soon after, the priest was reassigned, and Isabeau vanished, leaving only a note. She walked still. I only waited for her to remember. In 1996, a geneticist, Dr. Adrian Morel, tested strands of hair said to belong to Sara. The mitochondrial DNA was astonishingly well preserved, belonging to a rare haplogroup found only in southern France and parts of Egypt. Before he could publish, the Vatican intervened, demanding the samples. When he refused, his funding was frozen, his lab closed. He wrote in his journal, "They fear blood more than words. They know what this will show." The Vatican secret archives hold a file labeled simply Dossier S. According to a leaked description, it contains a timeline beginning with Sara of Galilee, tracing her descendants through the centuries. It includes a hand-drawn map linking sacred sites in France with spiral symbols. The final entry from the 15th century reads, "She walks in flesh still, keep her forgotten. If she is known, the line breaks." To preserve this silence, certain Jesuits took a private vow, the oath of eternal containment, binding them to guard truths that, if known, would shatter the Church. Their highest command, Custodi Sanguinem Guard, the blood. In the final winter of his life, a pope who had heard stories of Sara as a boy opened a box from the archives. Inside was a scroll describing a sacred union and a pendant bearing a spiral and a rose. What he read in the sealed records that followed changed him. In a private confession, he wrote, "If she lived, and I believe now she did, then we have buried more than just a girl. We have buried a truth too tender for power, and I am afraid not of her, but of what we've done in her absence." The letter was hidden for decades. In the stillness of his final breath, one name rested on his lips, Sara, but history leaves scars. In 1964, a German scholar discovered 3 pages cleanly removed from an early Christian manuscript. A 17th century note described them as referencing an unapproved lineage. The scholar's access to the library was revoked, her notes stolen. The missing pages were believed to describe the girl from the sea, bearing her father's eyes and her mother's silence. Symbols of her remained. The spiral cross, carved into abandoned chapels, bearing the untold blood. The silver-gray eyes of a girl, painted into the corners of frescoes, watching, waiting. The bleeding statue of an unnamed girl, which vanished after weeping tears of human blood. The broken chalice with Aramaic carvings, the water turned to blood, and the child drank first. In a monastery in Lebanon, monks still whisper a prayer in the hour before dawn, Sara of Galilee. When asked why, an abbot replied, "Because forgetting is the final death." The pilgrims know this. Each spring, they walk to les Saintes-Maries-de-la-Mer, not because of what they know, but because of what they feel. They kneel in her crypt and whisper her name. In a hidden cave nearby, a single, unexplained flame has burned for generations. Those who sit before it say they feel a presence, a memory. In dreams, she still comes, a girl with silver eyes, bringing not fear, but peace. The children of the Camargue still sing her name in the wind, a song with no composer, a melody they say they've always known. Why did the Vatican suppress the story of Sara? Because her existence meant the divine bloodline did not end at the cross. It flowed onward, through a daughter, into people the Church could never control. It meant Mary Magdalene was not a penitent sinner, but a divine partner. It meant holiness lived not just in celibate men in robes, but in marriage, in motherhood, in the quiet power of women. Sara represented the sacred outside the structure, and that could not be allowed, but the story is not over. It never was. The Vatican could no longer bury every page, burn every scroll, silence every voice. Too many had seen, a handful of cardinals, and whispered about by those who have passed through its walls once and never again. Some say it was created in secrecy long ago by a monk who had seen visions of a woman cloaked in blue, cradling a scroll instead of a child. She bore the mark of both God and man, and the silence that followed her was not absence, but reverence. That monk's name was Brother Elian, and he never spoke again after carving the circle into the chapel wall. His writings, discovered years later, spoke of a voice he heard not outside, but within. A voice that told him of Sara not as legend or ghost, but as blood. The voice said she was the bridge. Not a savior, not a queen, but something even more dangerous, a truth that could unite what the Church had worked so hard to keep apart. The Vatican sealed the chapel soon after, or so they claimed. Yet on certain nights, candles reappear at its doorway. Petals scatter across the stone steps. Someone, or many someones, have not forgotten. They return not with scriptures or chants, but in quiet prayer, a prayer with no sound, a mass with no need for words. Because when something is too true for language, silence becomes its sacred language. That silence extends to a door in the apostolic palace that should not exist. Past the second marble corridor is a door darker than any other, with no plaque, no guard, no light. Some call it the shadow door. It is locked at all times. Even the Pope must request a key. What lies behind it? A reclassified document from the 1960 seconds described an original gospel, penned by a woman who wrote of my mother Mary, and the one the world calls the Messiah, who called me his little dove. The gospel was said to be bound with red twine and sealed with a spiral-shaped clasper clasp that matches the description of a box said to rest inside that room. A box known by one name, the daughter's chest. If that box is real, then it may be why every pope since the 3rd century has sworn an oath never to speak of Jesus as a father. Some truths are too powerful to be spoken aloud. A custodian named Matteo, after 40 years of service, once found something at the foot of that door. Scrolled gently in the fine dust was a name, Sara, and beside it, a second word, remember. As he whispered her name, a gust of wind from nowhere swept the dust clean. The name was gone. That night, he found a blank paper in his old Bible. When held to the light, the name Sara appeared, as if written by fire. The next morning, Matteo walked past the guards, carrying the paper and a candle. He went to a forgotten chapel, a room where silence was sacred. He lit the candle on the simple wooden altar. A breeze curled around him. A voice, not of words but of memory, spoke. She was never lost, only buried. On the stone wall, a painting revealed itself in the flickering light. A woman with dark hair and sorrowful eyes, holding a child. A little girl in blue, staring out as if she could still see the world. The candle flame leaned toward the painting, reached for the child's face, touched the wall, and went out. The secret was not destroyed. It had been passed. Far from Rome, in a village where the salt from the sea still clung to the wind and the streets remembered the touch of pilgrims' feet, a young girl stood before a small statue. It was weathered by time, its stone face chipped and softened by years of prayer and rain. But in her eyes, the girl did not see cracks. She saw someone who looked like her. Her name was Sara, not a name chosen by accident. Her mother had whispered it to her on the day she was born beneath a sky split by stars. Her father had traced it in the sand before the waves washed it away. And now, as the sun rose over the rooftops of Saintes-Maries-de-la-Mer, Sara traced it again on a piece of parchment, just as Matteo had once done, his hands trembling with wonder. The girl had never met Matteo, but his story had found her. It had passed from voice to voice, written in margins of forbidden texts, spoken under breath in candle-lit corners. She read it first in a journal tucked behind a wall in an old abbey, and she felt it before she could even understand it. A pull, quiet and persistent, like a heartbeat that was not her own. Now she walked the path of those who came before her. The Salt Festival had begun again. The air smelled of sea and smoke. Music rose like birds from the square, and people gathered in colors and laughter. But Sara's steps did not follow the crowd. She walked toward the hidden chapel, the one sealed and forgotten, but this time the door opened. No lock, no guards, only the silence of stone welcoming her home. She lit a candle, not to remember, but to begin. For the story of Sara, daughter of Jesus, child of Mary Magdalene, heir to a truth buried by fear and power, was no longer something to be hidden. The Vatican could no longer bury every page, burn every scroll, silence every voice. Too many had seen, too many now believed. And belief, once born, is a flame that refuses to die. Outside the chapel, a breeze carried her name again, not as a secret, but as a song. Sara. Her story had been stolen by men who feared what it meant. But now, her story begins again, and the world, at last, is listening. Thanks for watching all the way through. So, what do you believe? Is the story of Sara a lost piece of history or a carefully constructed myth? What other secrets do you think are hidden in the Vatican's vaults? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation, and if you're drawn to the mysteries that lie behind history, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that were never meant to be told.